One of my best friends is my older brother, Brady. He is one of the most kind, generous, and funny people that I know. He was the first person in our family to received a master's degree, which really encouraged and inspired me to follow my own academic dreams. This is actually a picture of him and myself at my first college graduation. Last year, we were very concerned when my typically level-headed brother began acting very strange. It was as if he were living in a different world. He was speaking in codes that didn't make sense to us. He was paranoid, and he hadn't slept in days. Not knowing what to do, we called 911, hoping for an ambulance to help us get him to the hospital. Except instead of an ambulance, several police officers showed up instead. This caused the situation to escalate because my brother, in his paranoid state of mind, thought that they were there to hurt him and our family. He ended up being arrested with force used on him, charged with a felony, and put into jail. For several days, my family and I had no idea where he was or how he was. We had no communication with him. It felt as if my brother had been legally kidnapped from us. Meanwhile, he was sitting in solitary confinement, restrained to his bed with a spit mask on him, not knowing where he was or what was going to happen to him. It wasn't until later that we discovered that my brother had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, and what he had just experienced was a severe manic episode. I think one of the most horrifying parts of this story is that it's not uncommon. Would you be vulnerable with me for just a moment and raise your hand if you or anyone you know has a mental illness? That's a lot of people in this room. Did you know that if you have a mental illness, you're very likely to be arrested at least one time? According to the National Alliance of Mental Illness, over 2 million people in the United States with mental illnesses are arrested every year. I believe that there's one common myth that leads to these horrifying statistics, and it's that people who are mentally ill are violent and unpredictable, and therefore extremely dangerous. When we see someone who can't breathe or is choking, there's almost always someone around who has been trained to perform CPR. But when we see someone having a manic episode or acting weird in public, there is often no one who knows how to handle that situation. They are often viewed as a threat or as violent rather than someone who needs help, so the police are called, often ending in their arrest. The truth is, very few violent acts can be attributed to a person with a mental illness. In fact, the ones who are in the real danger are the mentally ill themselves. They are 11 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. I believe that we feel threatened by them because we don't understand them, and instead of trying to understand them, we hurt them so that we can feel safe. So how did we get here? Gary Cordner, an academic director for the Police Academy, explains to us that when a majority of the psychiatric facilities closed in the 20th century, they didn't provide adequate resources to replace these facilities. This left some of the most severely mentally ill and vulnerable without access to psychiatric care, which led to higher rates of homelessness and incarceration. We deinstitutionalized the mentally ill just to turn around and criminalize them. I understand that statistics can often seem boring or like they just affect people over there and have nothing to do with us. But what happens when a statistic comes up and close and personal and affects you or someone that you love? A community in Iowa came together and created the Mobile Crisis Response Team. This team consists of social workers, trained therapists, and nurses who partner with law enforcement on crisis calls. Once the Mobile Crisis Response Team arrives, they do a mental health assessment and from there can connect the individual to the needed resources. If needed, medication can also be administered directly on site. The goal for them wasn't just to keep someone out of jail, but to truly help them find the resources and help that they needed. They also follow up with the individual 48 hours after the initial call to ensure that they are receiving the help needed to promote long-term stability. These programs have been proven to reduce harm and reduce the overall amount of mental health crisis calls in general because people are actually getting the help that they need right away. With results as great as these, it makes me wonder why every community doesn't have a program like this. These changes were implemented because this community cared. And I believe that in order for our community to care, they first have to know that these problems exist, and that requires advocacy. Advocacy doesn't have to be hard. It can be as simple as having these conversations with your friends, families, and coworkers. It can also look like digging deep to uproot your own biases against those who have mental illnesses. I'm in my senior year of the social work program at UNT. And one of the core values that they taught us from day one is to respect the inherent dignity and worth of every single person, no matter what. I wonder if we all embodied this value, how much better off we would be. When I was preparing this talk, I asked my brother if there was anything he wanted me to tell you. And he said, "Reagan, I just want them all to know how scared and how alone I felt." He thought he was going to die there. And I've never felt the kind of fear or pain that I felt, knowing we did everything we could to try to help him, and instead he ended up hurt. In one of his most vulnerable moments, he was treated inhumanely. I have a hope that someday we don't have to see how human someone is before we treat them humanely. My other hope is that we can separate a person from their mental illness. My brother is not bipolar, he has bipolar. And in order for those to understand those with mental illnesses, they first have to see them as they really are, as a person, not as a problem or as an inconvenience to society. I hope that by being here today, I was able to give back to my brother a piece of the dignity and worth that was stolen from him. Thank you for allowing me to give a voice to his story. Thank you.